Look, there's way too many people these days that caution against premature excitement. All right? Get excited about things prematurely. Are you going to be wrong sometimes? Yeah. But look, Steve Jobs was prematurely excited about the computer. Bill Gates. It all worked out splendidly for those guys. And I think there's good reason to get excited about a few things with the Texans right now. And as a surprise to many of us, they're on the offensive side of the ball. Not that I'm surprised that I feel better about the offense, but I think the sum total of what I've seen out there and how the offense is competing against the defense is way further along than I had expected it to be early in camp. And a lot of that centers around CJ Stroud. So NFL Network was out at camp yesterday. Kurt Warner and Jane Slater were there. They interviewed DeMeco, they interviewed Jadeveon Clowney, and they interviewed CJ Stroud and asked a lot of good questions. And I love it when quarterbacks talk to other quarterbacks. So when a guy like CJ Stroud is talking to a Hall of Fame quarterback, they open up a little bit more. I think we got a little bit more openness about CJ and maybe his offseason process and what he learned from that Patriots game. So I want to go through some of these answers and talk about what CJ has given us to be excited about, Clowney, and some of the things I'm excited about with him, as well as the other addition, Reed Blankenship, and what I've seen out there. And I'm pointing towards, you can see the practice bubble off there in the distance if you're watching on YouTube. And then DeMeco flat out tells us what he's excited about. So CJ Stroud was asked by Kurt Warner, how do you go about balancing this aggressive nature where you want to attack downfield, but with also the need to be conservative at times? And I thought CJ gave a great answer.
How do you talk to the coaches about that balance between being you and being aggressive, but also playing conservative when you need to feed into what your defense does?
Yeah, it was tough for me at first. I come from a background since I was a kid. My coaches always told me you can make every throw on the field. Don't ever doubt yourself. We're rocking with you no matter what. Things kind of change as you get older. You got to mature and realize you don't always got to be Superman, but make the other guys around you Superman. And, that's something that I'm still learning. And I'm grateful that I have both abilities, and I'm learning how to do both. And I'm just, trying to get better at that.
Okay, so there's two things about that. CJ says that it was a slow process at the beginning, and we could see last year in press conferences, CJ would talk about how it's a death by 1,000 paper cuts offense, and it looked like a hostage video at first. He would say, I'm exaggerating, this is a death by 1,000 paper cuts, and it's what we're doing. And I think by the end of the season, until the playoffs, that it felt like he had actually seen the benefits of it. And the other part of that, and I'm glad to hear him say, and I've heard him say this before, but I do think he has a different attitude about understanding that you got to trust your teammates, that, hey, and you could frame it like this. If I were a coach, I might say, CJ, you're not a selfish guy. I know at your core, you're not a selfish guy. But if you don't trust that, hey, if I check the ball down to the running back early in the down, if I don't trust that he can actually do something with that, or if I don't take the shorter route, that I don't trust that guy can do something with it, you're kind of not showing the trust in your teammates. And I think that's where CJ's mindset wants to be. And he's referenced that a couple times this preseason so far, that, you trust your teammates to get that done. It doesn't have to be all on him. And then the other part, too, we saw this with Pat Mahomes. Pat Mahomes was very aggressive downfield early in his career. Defenses adjusted, and he had to learn to be a more conservative quarterback. And just through hard lessons and basically by getting beat upside the head a few times in a football sense, you start to learn that, all right, we gotta, sometimes it's better to keep a certain pace that allows you to finish and win the race than to just burn out and fade away. This is Stroud asked a question about Kurt Warner, about the lessons he learned from the Patriots game.
Was there something you were able to take from that game that you applied this offseason?
Yeah, I just think system things, working, with the O-line on protections, pocket movement, throwing on the run was a big one for that game. So those are all things I attacked in the offseason and, got to go back to L.A. with my trainers and really, go hard on it. And I really didn't take a break. So right after the game, I probably took like a day off and I flew home and then came and got right back to work.
So pocket movement, moving on the run, and then the protections, and that's huge. When Landry Locker asked a good question of Nick Caserio last year during the season about what's different about this offense, perhaps compared to other offenses, And Nick said something interesting, which was it really is all about the pass protection and making it as easy to make it physically easier to be solid in pass protection. And in a lot of ways, it's like everything else in football. There's some things that you do that seem complex, but once you figure it out, it's actually pretty simple. And that's what they do is they try to simplify things for the offensive line. Except to get there, you got to be able to recognize and understand a few things and be on the same page. So when we talk about last year during training camp, there are so many guys that were just unblocked. There were just so many times where CJ couldn't even fake like he hadn't been sacked and throw the ball like quarterbacks sometimes do in training camp because there'd be three guys in his face. And sometimes that's a mental error on the offensive line's part. Sometimes it's because the quarterback didn't set the protection properly or didn't necessarily know who the hot defender was going to be. And all of these things look a lot better in camp this year. CJ looks so much more in command of the line of scrimmage. We've seen when there's a breakdown in pass protection, by and large, the vast majority of times I've seen it, it's because somebody got physically beat, which happens. All right. But you got to be able to put yourself in position to at least get physically beat as opposed to guys being on the wrong page. So the process in the pre-snap process, which is what we talked about all OTAs and minicamp, that's looked a lot better, both from just a standpoint of the shifts and motions before the snap, getting the protections right, but then the pre-snap penalties as well. I don't think I've seen, when the officials are out there, I may have seen one, possibly two pre-snap penalties, and that's pretty rare for early in camp. And again, I'm not afraid to get prematurely excited, okay? It's never too early to get excited too early, and that's a big development because this is where people are usually at their dumbest and clunkiest, and the Texans have not been that way so far. One more from CJ. Let's see. How do the wide receivers complement the Nico Collins? And I think CJ expands on into more than just the wide receivers here.
You talk to me about how they complement Nico in this offense.
Yeah, I think Nico, of course, is the one-on-one guy. He can do everything. He can get in the slot, go outside, big playability, big yak ability. And then, the other guys, I think they're very talented. Some guys who played a lot of college ball, played together in college with Hutch and Hig and Jay Noel. And then you got Tank. You got J-Watt coming from a championship mentality. I think he has 3 rings, so he has that mentality and that work ethic. And then also our tight end room. I think we brought in Marlon, rookie from, that team up north. Yep. He's doing very well. Then we got Dalton, of course, our ace at tight end, Cade, Foster. Running backs doing well. So and then my biggest thing is we're tough up front. We got some tough guys, some young guys who are pushing everybody else. Like Keylan's doing great. Wyatt from the Browns got a lot of experience. I can go on and on. Everybody's doing really well. So I'm very excited for the group we have offensively.
I like when quarterbacks go through the whole depth chart, and he probably felt bad afterwards that he had missed a few guys. And the question was about the wide receivers and how they complement Nico. I think that the second-year leap by Higgins has been definitely substantial, and he, in a lot of ways, is following CJ's first year in the offense, where you just understand more about just the proper leverage, the pre-snap reads, the sight adjustments, all of those things, and the receiving core in general has been one of the things that's allowed CJ to look way more automatic. Balls coming up quick, not a lot of hesitation or anything. Things we've seen from CJ plenty of times before, but it's been really notably consistent. He also mentioned Rutledge, and DeMeco talks about Rutledge. We'll get into that a little bit later, but I was hesitant to buy too much into Rutledge. And then the pads came on, and I saw more of the same of what we'd been seeing after the pads came on. So I think he's the real deal. And then he went through all the receivers, and I don't think he mentioned any of the rookies, but I mean, just like the young receivers, Lewis Bond, Josh Kelly has shown up a bunch of times. It's a really competitive group. I think there's going to be some good and promising young receivers that end up on the practice squad this year, just because it's going to be too crowded a receiver room. And like with Tank Dell and who knows at this point. For those of you who missed it, he practiced in shoulder pads yesterday. Didn't do a whole lot extra, but I think they are just taking baby steps with him. But every time I see him physically running around or maneuvering, he looks pretty damn good to me. It's nice to have somebody that's eager to be out there. Just like when you're hiring, it's nice to have somebody who's eager to have your job specifically, not just throwing their name out there for anybody and everybody, but ZipRecruiter helps you do that. They help you find somebody who's interested in your job specifically. They let them go that extra step and tell you why they're interested as a way to stand out from the others. And right now, you can try it for free at ZipRecruiter.com/audio. ZipRecruiter's powerful matching technology finds qualified candidates quickly. They can tell you in their own words why they're interested in your job. That's why ZipRecruiter is a #1 rated hiring site based on G2. So try ZipRecruiter and meet great candidates who will go the extra step or rep or indie period with shoulder pads on for your job. 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. So try it for free at ZipRecruiter.com/audio. That's ZipRecruiter.com/audio. ZipRecruiter, meet your match on ZipRecruiter. The other guy that I'm excited about and why I feel even more confident now that the Texans will surpass the 9.5 win total on FanDuel, because come on, they do every year since DeMeco's been here. And I think that the defense was already going to be potentially even better this year because they had Reed Blankenship, because they drafted Cade McDonald, because they signed Logan Hall, who is an underrated development. And now they brought in Mario Edwards back into the fold as well. But Jadeveon Clowney, out of nowhere, just off the top rope, was it was awesome already. But then when I saw him out there at practice yesterday, oh my gosh, he's still very much has it. His first rep, he had a really nice speed to power versus Braden Smith. Then his next couple of reps, he had a couple of really nice rushes versus Trent Brown. And you might say, like, hey, Seth, why are you so excited? That's against that offensive line that we're always worried about, right? Yeah, look, I've seen Jadeveon Clowney do this against the best offensive tackles in the league. Things are going to happen in practice. The Texans aren't necessarily throwing a chip or double teaming guys as much right now when they're just working on their own things. But it was really nice to see out of Clowney. And when it comes to some of the possibilities, we'll talk about it after Kurt Warner asked Clowney about what's the unique skill set that you bring to this defense.
What do you bring that's unique to this defense?
Just my energy and my physicality, and I feel like I'm a very versatile player. I can do it all. So it's like you can line me up anywhere, and you can put us all on the field together. You can put me anywhere, and they know that. So that's what I felt like I was bringing to this team, and get them guys breaks or whatever they need. It's great. It's a better team. You have multiple guys up front that can roll and go in there and no fall off, and you just keep wearing the tackles down and the other guys down.
Yeah. So rotating in, yes, because you keep everybody fresh. You got 3 stud edge rushers now. There's going to be vicious competition to be that 4th guy between Dominique Robinson, Solomon Byrd, Dylan Horton. And Solomon Byrd's really shown up a lot. Dylan Horton is underrated in terms of his ability to play the run. He's still a work in progress as a pass rusher, but he's a big guy, and a few other guys in there as well. But the other thing that Clowney said, hey, his ability to line up anywhere, and just exactly what the Texans did when they'd have J.J. Watt and Whitney Merciless on the edges, and then on passing downs, Jadeveon Clowney kind of roaming and as a stand-up inside rusher. That in and of itself is really good. But then really what John Harris and I were talking about it this morning, the ability of Clowney and Will Anderson to play games on their side of the ball. So a game is basically like a blitz, but without actually bringing an extra rusher. It's when you see the twists and the stunts by the defensive linemen amongst themselves. Clowney and Will both have an appetite for destruction and violence, and they enjoy setting a hard pick if you're the penetrator on a stunt as much as they do getting the actual quarterback down. And you could use those guys in a variety of ways, and I think the Texans will. I'll be surprised if they don't. So above and beyond the way that Jadeveon can play just as a defensive end in general, they're going to have some funky things to do with him. And that's also, I keep getting questions about him playing actual defensive tackle. And I got to be clear with this. When I talk about Clowney playing inside, not as an actual defensive tackle, except as somebody who's rushing from the inside on passing downs. You don't want Clowney anchoring down versus double teams or playing nose tackle or something like that. Not that he couldn't do it, but by and large, like he's got a lankier physique and everything. He's a great run stuffer. If it's part of a blitz or something, hell yeah. But in terms of just playing classic defensive tackle, that's not quite his skill set, nor should it be, because he'd be wasting his talents. This is when Warner asked Clowney about actually getting into camp early for the first time in what seems like forever.
I think it's 5 teams in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
How does that help you when you're jumping into a new situation to be able to learn the scheme and be able to play quick?
It's hard. It's very hard, to be honest. Sometimes I go in after camp and get in that week one, I'm looking across the field. I'm like, hey, the guy telling me to do this or to get back, and I'm just, going with the flow. But that's why I wanted to come here early to try to get in the training camp so I can learn the playbook, knock the rust off early instead of knocking off my first 2 games in the season like I did in Dallas and everywhere else I've been. So that was my mindset, and I was already here, like I said. And it's just been an energy thing for me around here that's got me wanting to come here early, the energy and the guys around me. So it's been great.
That part, I think if Clowney had gotten his best offer from the Texans when they were coached by Bill O'Brien, let's say they'd made up in the offseason or something, and Bill O'Brien wanted to bring Clowney back into the fold, you wouldn't have heard that last part there, that energy and that excitement. Clowney mentioned in another part of this interview that you can see watching on television just the way these guys play, and that is 100% true. As a defensive player watching this defense play, I've told you guys before, I get kind of jealous. I get kind of jealous of just how many awesome dudes they have that play unselfishly and with energy and just love the game of football. It's a really unique and cool culture, and it jumps off the television screen when you see it. As far as him getting in early, it's interesting because it's not like this is a complicated defense for the defensive line, especially, and they try to make it as simple as possible so guys can just play fast. The fun part of it is that it's this wide 9 defense where the defensive ends are lined up outside and just hell-bent for leather a lot of the time. He's played in schemes like this before with Seattle and with Cleveland, so he spent at least a few years. I don't think there's going to be any issue at all getting him on board quickly. It's going to be way earlier than he has in the past few years. But just him talking about the ability to play fast, you could draw some similarities in that in the way that CJ Stroud was talking about, being comfortable with all the mental stuff that just as it is with defensive linemen, when you don't have to think too much, you can play fast. As a quarterback, you're always going to have to think a good chunk, but by knowing the system and being in the system, it becomes more automatic and you can play a lot faster. CJ Stroud is at 50-1 to win the MVP this year on FanDuel. That's been pretty static for a while. I feel a lot better about those odds being a little too steep after watching him this first week. Remember, I'm not afraid to get prematurely excited about this. So that's where we are with that. Coming up next, I want to hear DeMeco talk about the thing he's most excited about coming into this season.
Of all the all-season additions, what are you most excited for fans to see once they hit the field?
Well, I'm most excited to see our improved running game. So I'm really excited for our offensive line. They've done a really great job here over the first 6 days of camp. They've been physical. They've been finishing the right way. I love the feistiness of our group, and I love we have a great back and forth going on between our defense and our offense, and I love seeing that.
Yeah, the back and forth, it's so much different. It's night and day from last year. And you get to the offense had a rough period. One of their first couple of periods was pretty rough yesterday. And I think last year, if I'd been watching, I would have thought, well, that's it the offense hasn't taken the step forward. They go into 2-minute drill, and CJ was brilliant in that 2-minute drill. The wide receivers were excellent. They had to overcome a really long down and distance situation. They did let up a sack, but that's going to happen versus this defense. They're always that any offense out there, whether it's the Rams or the Seahawks or the Houston Texans offense, they're all going to take their lumps versus this defense. But how can you overcome that? They did a great job of it, and they have had multiple good series now since the pads came on. CJ is stacking days, the proverbial thing that the kids love to say these days. He's stacking days. DeMeco, you heard just say, all right, he's excited about the rushing attack. See, I can't stop talking and thinking about CJ. He's excited about the rushing attack, and a lot of that starts with the offensive line. David Montgomery is a known quantity. Woody Marks is way more of a known quantity than you might expect out of an undersized running back who's in his second year, partly because, for a smaller guy, he runs physical. He breaks tackle. He carries dudes on his back who are trying to tackle him just to get the first down that you need in the fourth quarter. I think DeMeco knows, and he's comfortable with those guys as running backs. The offensive line was the one where you make these offseason additions in free agency and in the draft, and you think you got something that's a little bit grittier, a little bit feistier was the word he used, a little bit tougher. And especially since the pads came on, they've had some good moments. They've had some bad moments. But I'll tell you, something Tom Coughlin used to say all the time in meeting rooms. He said, I'll be able to close my eyes and hear the shoulder. What do you say? Hear the helmets crash. Hear the helmets crash. And I'll know if the intensity is good enough. And we were always kind of like, yeah, but how can you tell which side the intensity is coming from? There's more of a thud. There's more of a thud sound on the inside runs this year than there was before. And you always knew that the defensive line was thudding, but the offensive line wasn't thudding back last year. I think there's a lot of thud back in both directions, and it's going to be a better rushing attack. How good could it be? We'll see. I've seen some really nicely executed runs with nice clear paths. Holes. We see holes with that Texans offensive line. Get into the preseason game. I hope that the starters get a chance to play as a group for at least a few series and a few games. I know you got to protect your veterans, but you also got to protect yourself from going 0-3. All right. I don't know if you guys noticed last year, but it's hard to come back from 0-3. You got to go on a really, really impressive winning streak to come back from 0-3. Here's DeMeco on one of those offensive linemen, Keylan Rutledge.
Keylan Rutledge is getting so much love out here. I haven't had eyes on practice for as many days as some of the other reporters. Why are people singing his praises right now?
Well, they're singing his praises because you see 66 running downfield, taking a Mike linebacker 15 yards downfield. It's like, wait, is that an offensive lineman that far downfield? Yeah, that's him. So you see the feistiness. You see him shoving after the play, like just a gritty, old-school offensive lineman that we haven't seen in a while, and that's really jumping out in our camp this year.
And a rookie.
And a rookie who doesn't play like a rookie. So it's fun to watch him play.
No, he doesn't play like a rookie. Somebody this morning on the radio on 95.7 The Fan, it'll be 95.7 The Fan on August 13th, still Sports Radio 610 until then. But somebody asked, hey, Seth, you used to, talk about guys like Trevor Penning, who are these Joe Tough guys and jumping on people after the pile and everything. How come you hate Trevor Penning, but you like Keylan Rutledge? Here's the thing. I love down and dirty, physically tough offensive linemen. For those of you who don't know, I was a defensive lineman. But so when there's a guy, though, like that who's not good at blocking people, but then acts like a tough guy after the play, or after you get beaten pass protection, you're punching the defensive lineman in the kidneys on his way to the quarterback. You're just a fake tough guy at that point. So I really respect guys like Wyatt Teller. I've always thought Wyatt Teller, who's known for being a guy that pancake blocks people, it's really tough and gritty and physical. I've always loved him because he does it through the course of a football play, and he'll keep getting after you when the play's away and everything. That's cool. Like, I respect that. And Keylan Rutledge is that kind of guy. I wanted to wait and see what he looked like in the pads. And, he's the guy that I think I get excited about because I think he looks better in the pads than he did in no pads. And sometimes that's what happens with offensive and defensive linemen. If you've got a physical element to your game, and all of a sudden your opponent doesn't have shoulder pads on, and you can't butt them up and be as nasty and physical as you like to be because that's your MO, then you lose an advantage there. So it's cool to see for a guy like Keylan Rutledge, whose calling card, I'm sure he would like his calling card to be his physicality. You put the pads on, and all of a sudden now that you can really thud, that guy looks better against guys with shoulder pads on, even though he's taken a leap up in intensity and everything like that. So a lot to get excited about with Keylan Rutledge. So I might be prematurely excited. I might be appropriately excited. I'm not going to Goldilocks this thing. I feel like I'm just right. I think that this is exactly where I need to be. And the family of bears, how many bears are in the bear family? Is it 3 bears that come back to Goldilocks place? I got to get up to speed on my fairy tales before I have grandchildren. I feel good about it. We'll see with a preseason game. Hopefully we get, come on, DeMeco. Just do it. Just play the starters. Live a little. All right. It's just it. Nobody knows how long we're going to be on this earth. We got the meteor asteroid could hit us after the 2 days after the first preseason game. Just go out and smoke them if you got them, etc. And therefore, hey, if you haven't liked or subscribed to the podcast yet on YouTube, on Spotify, on Apple, wherever you're watching or listening, please do. It helps other Texans fans find this little community via the algorithm. And until then, everybody have a great one. If you're out at practice on Friday or Saturday, yell my name and I'll try to come over and chat with you a little bit.